supposed to be an easy tune, right? It's all in the key of C. So why is it when we learn to solo over it, you need 10 scales? 10 scales? That doesn't sound so easy. It means that you're going to be thinking about this scale and that pattern. And what aren't you thinking about? Music. Music's made from scales, but scales are not music. Jazz isn't a formula, it's a feeling. And as Victor Wooten tells us, nobody wants to hear your theory, they want to hear your passion. But you can't do that if you're worried about which scale to play. And if you're thinking about scales and theory, you're using the analytical part of your brain, not the emotional. When I played rock and blues as a kid, I used the minor pentatonic scale and played what I felt. And when I first started playing jazz, well, I learned scales and theory, and it worked okay. But in the back of my mind, I knew there must be a way to play with the same feeling that I had when I played rock. Well, there is. The key is to make it so you have to think less. And in this video, I'll show you how. It's a simple 3-step process, and it works with most tunes. It's one of the first things I do when I'm starting to work out solos over a tune. Get your ears and fingers locked into the harmony, but you'll only be thinking of 1 or 2 scales instead of 10. So our first step is analysis. We're going to identify the chord categories for each chord, and then find the key notes that outline the harmony. Then you're going to learn to hear and play those notes, and then finally you'll embellish them using notes from the parent key. So the fundamental concept is that we need to change the way we think about scales. If I asked you to play a scale in the key of C, you might play it like this. And then if I asked you to play the key of G, you might play this pattern. So these are 2 very different patterns, but in reality, we've only changed 1 note. So the same thing is true of non-diatonic chords. When a chord isn't in the key, you don't need a whole new scale or pattern. You only have to change or add 1 note. We're going to simplify the analysis too. There are only 3 categories of chords we'll be concerned with. Diatonic chords, which are chords that only use notes of the current key. Most of the chords in the song will be diatonic. Secondary dominants, which are dominant 7th chords that are built on a diatonic root. And borrowed chords. And these are chords that are borrowed from the parallel minor, and they'll be the 4 minor chord and its substitutes. So now let's look at all of me. When analyzing a song, we try to keep it in 1 key unless there's a clear modulation. All of me is in the key of C, and here are the chords in the key. The first step is to identify all of the diatonic chords. Now we don't really need to worry about Roman numerals right now. Now let's look at the non-diatonic chords. First, the secondary dominants. E7 is a dominant 7th built on the 3rd scale degree, so it's a secondary dominant. E minor is 7 is E, G, B, D. E7 is E, G sharp, B, D. So the difference is G sharp, and that's the note we're looking for. A7 is a dominant 7th built on the 6th scale degree. The diatonic chord A minor 7 is A, C, E, G. Dominant 7th is A, C sharp, E, G, so the difference is C sharp. That's our note. We also have a D7 chord. D7 is a dominant 7th built on the 2nd scale degree. D minor 7, the diatonic chord is D, F, A, C. The dominant 7th is D, F sharp, A, C. So F sharp is a different note. You'll notice that all of those were the 3rd of the chord. In the second half of the song, the first 8 bars are the same. In the last section, F major 7 and C major 7 are diatonic, and the 2-5-1 at the end. Now we also have another A7 chord, so it's going to have a C sharp as its target note. The last chord is the F minor 6. It's a borrowed chord from the parallel minor. And as with all subdominant minor chords, the key note is the flat 6 of the key. Now we also want to take a look at the melody. If we look at the A7 chord in the first section, you'll see there's a B flat in the melody. Well, that's not in the key, so we're going to have to deal with that. But down at the end, there's another A7 chord with a B natural in the melody. So when we approach these 2 chords, it will be different. So for that first A7 chord, we're going to add a second target note, B flat. So instead of this, we now have this. A lot simpler, huh? But here's the thing. If we fill in the notes from the parent scale for each of the non-diatonic chords, we end up with almost the same thing. Actually, maybe a little better because we're using bebop scales, or as Barry Harris calls them, the 6 diminished scales, instead of modes. What really has changed, though, is how we think about it, or don't. So you see, when theory is used the right way, it makes things easier to understand and remember. But you have to go beyond the surface. You have to know enough about theory to apply it. Otherwise, it just makes it way more complicated, and instead of one scale and a few notes, you end up with 10 scales. Now, I can show you how to do it. If you're not a theory nerd like me, let me do it for you. I do the heavy lifting, so you don't have to. In the Jumpstart Jazz Guitar Coaching Program, the goal is to get you playing jazz with confidence as quickly as possible. You'll learn tunes and develop the skills and knowledge you need to play them as you go. It's an approach that maintains a balance between the ears, the hands, and the head. You get customized lesson plans and unlimited personal support and feedback. And I've made it so anyone can afford it. If you can play bar chords and pentatonic scales, you can be playing jazz in no time. If you'd like to know more, sign up for a free trial lesson with me. The link is in the description down below. So now let's put this into play. Since most of the chords are diatonic, we'll start there. But we only need one scale, the major scale. Forget modes. Playing the D-Dorian mode on the D minor chord is about as boring as you can get. If you start on C, the 7th, it's actually a little hipper, and that'll be true for most chords in the key. You also don't have to outline every chord change and resolution. Play melodies, develop ideas. Just don't land on avoid notes. And even that's not absolute. If you do, just resolve to the next note in the scale. Now, I'm not going to list these because I want you to use your ear for them. But otherwise, anything goes. You can add some blue notes or approach tones. Eventually, use any of the 12 notes. The scale is just your framework, but you can decorate it in a lot of ways. There's only one resolution you might want to think about. You see, all diatonic progressions reduce to 1-5-1. And the resolution, the target note that we're looking at, is actually the 7th of the key. It's the 3rd of the 5 chord, and it also outlines the resolution of the 2-5. Now, you don't always need to hit it, and it doesn't always need to be on the downbeat. In fact, you can land on any note for the 5 chord, except for the avoid note, which is the tonic of the key. So here's the first exercise. Play each diatonic chord, followed by a phrase. Use the C major scale as your framework, but you can use any of the 12 notes. Your phrase containers should be as long as the duration of the chord in the song. So most of the chords are 2 bars, so most of your containers will be 2 bars long. You can play as many or as few notes as you'd like in each container. Try to vary it as much as you can. Repeat each chord as many times as you like before moving to the next chord, and then start to identify things that you like. So now we're going to add in the target notes and follow the form of the song. Use a backing track and start fairly slow, around 100 beats per minute. For diatonic chords, play the phrase. And then for non-diatonic chords, play only the identity note and sustain it throughout the duration. So you're going to try various ways to approach the note, by leap, by step, from above, below, diatonic or chromatic. So there are all sorts of different ways to do that. Here's an example. So the third step is to add notes to the identity notes to fill out your phrases. Here's one idea that works pretty well. For diatonic chords, you'll play as before, and for the non-diatonic chords, you're going to add 2 approach notes to the ID notes. So you can either use a double approach from one direction or above or below, or you can use an enclosure where the notes approach from above and below. Now these can be either chromatic or diatonic. So now it's time to solo. You've got ideas for the diatonic chords, you know where the notes that define the non-diatonic chords are, and most importantly, you know what they sound like. You can add notes from the major scale to the identity notes. And of course, you can add chromatic notes too. So here's an example. I'm limiting the solo to the ideas that I shared in this video. So here are some final tips. First, don't overplay. If you approach a defining note, 1 or 2 notes after it may be all you need. Try repeating diatonic ideas and then replace the diatonic note with an ID note. But don't be overly concerned about the ID notes. If you miss one, it's still going to sound fine. And this last one's probably the most important. Your lines trump your harmony. If you're developing an idea, go with it, even if it doesn't appear to fit the harmony perfectly. One of the most important things that was ever told to me was by a really fine piano player who looked at me one night and said, "You know, I really like it when you don't play the changes all the time." So now All of Me really is a simple tune to play. Just 1 scale, 5 target notes, and all but one of those target notes is the 3rd of the chord. This will work for any tune that can be analyzed in 1 major key, and even some that have modulations. And the good news is that there are hundreds of tunes like this. And if you'd like to see how it works on a more advanced tune, check out this video.